Violence in the streets. It's kind of in our DNA. It kind of goes back to the approach of the American Revolution and the American Revolution itself. So the question is, can a loud mob be a good thing or a bad thing? Or does it depend on if the cause is righteous or not? And how do we know it's righteous? So, hi, my name is Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, DouglasVGibbs.com, PoliticalPistachio.com. And violence in the streets and standing up to the system, well, that was a part of our history. That is a part of our history. Part of the history that some people want to topple. The Boston Massacre being a particular scene during the approach to the American Revolution. The ralliers, the protesters, the Americans that didn't go by the word Americans yet, they had done things such as smeared urine or feces on the doors of governors or persons that worked for the British government, and they even threw bottles and rocks and glass and things like that at British troops. Eventually, something was going to eventually happen. There was going to be a blast point, a flash point, as I guess you could say. And it happened with the Boston Massacre. Now, the Boston Massacre was described differently depending on who side you were on, and of course, the American press painted it as the British bullies coming in and slaughtering these poor, innocent little, people. The British saw it as a little differently, because the press, even back then, had a little bit of a slant of their opinion. Now, there's an old saying: there are three sides to every story. There's what he said, there's what she said, and then there's, well, what really happened. I'm not sure what happened at the Boston Massacre, and I know that there was a lot of these clashes, street violence and things like that, but it was a righteous anger. It was a call for independence. Now, that said, the American leaders of the time, the founding fathers, the Thomas Jeffersons, the Adamses, and so on and so forth, they were concerned that they would be seen as lawless, that it would be seen as mob rule rather than Englishmen just simply seeking to be treated fairly by the crown. So after the Boston Massacre, John Adams, who, by the way, later would become the second president of the United States, was a lawyer, and he decided he would defend the British troops. He would defend the very troops that fired upon Americans at the Boston Massacre. Why would he do such a thing? Because he wanted to show and prove to the British crown that America was not lawless. It was not just a bunch of mobs running around causing heck, but that we did follow the rule of law, and that we were not a lawless country, but that the law was important to us, that procedure was important to us, that justice was important to us. So they followed the Saxon system idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. The British troops did not have to prove their innocence. Those who were standing against the British troops had to prove their guilt. In the end, John Adams prevailed, and it was very controversial at the time. Ultimately, what wound up happening is we did wind up in a war, a revolutionary war, in which street violence went on to something even bigger. But through that war, we earned our independence. We gained our independence as a country, as an independent, sovereign country that was no longer under the colonial fist of the British Empire. It's funny because some people who claim to be anti-colonialists try to put the United States of America into that colonialist little narrative that they've got. And to be honest with you, there's nothing more anti-colonialism than the United States of America. Because the United States decided, these colonies decided, they didn't want to be under the rule of colonialism anymore. And they rebelled. And they fought for independence. And they shot the colonialists and chased them from our shores. Now, the British did return in the War of 1812, something I guess I would consider the second Revolutionary War. They had never recognized the United States as a sovereign country. We were actually just petulant children of them who were, well, living under mob rule, because that's actually the way the British saw the beginning of the American Revolution. But nonetheless, we prevailed in that war as well, and ultimately became a well-respected member of the global community, and ultimately a superpower based on our system of liberty and a free market. Why do I bring that up? Because I want to bring up what's been going on lately. We can go back to Ferguson. We can go to Portland. We can go to Seattle. We can go to the threats now during the Chauvin trial. Or we could even go to January 6th at the Capitol, where allegedly Trump supporters created violence at the Capitol. Personally, I think there were infiltrators, and that the senior citizens that tend to follow Trump and the peaceful conservatives that were there were not the cause. But that's a whole different discussion, and we'll get into it some other time. But what I want to talk about is the fact that when it comes to mob violence, there's a history there. We could talk about the French Revolution. We could talk about the American Revolution. We could talk about Spain. We could talk about Vienna. We could talk about the Crusades, which was a response to Islam. We could even talk about going all the way back to Rome, the Roman Republic. If you read Cicero, what you find out is Cicero was very critical of Clodius. Clodius was one of two consuls. The Roman system had two consuls, which were basically the executive branch, because they didn't trust one. They would serve as checks against each other since there were two of them. And Clodius used street violence to solidify his power. And Cicero recognized it and was very critical of it. Street violence is nothing new. We saw it in the Greek states. We see it in the Old Testament of the Bible. Now that's interesting, because the question is now, we get back to what I wanted to ask in the very beginning, which is, when is mob violence righteous, like it was with the revolutionaries approaching the American Revolution, and when is it not so righteous? In other words, are conservatives who believe that the Second Amendment is important for us to stand against the government should it go tyrannical, are we any different than those that are causing violence in the streets right now regarding the Chauvin trial and all this other stuff? It comes down to morality, righteousness. What's right? When is it right to get a little violent, have a little mob? When is it not? Well, that comes down to a value system. That comes down to morality. That comes down to godliness. I'm a firm believer there is a right time and a wrong time to do certain things. That it is not hypocritical when something happens and it looks like a repeat of something somebody else did, but then that somebody else says, oh, wait a second, what you're doing is wrong. It's not always necessarily hypocritical. Because one, the American Revolution, was a drive for independence and to break away from tyranny. I think what we're experiencing today is the exact opposite. It is to bring tyranny into the system. It is to bring about tyranny. It is to create so much chaos that the old system is destroyed. And then, when all the chaos is going on, the people begin to cry out for order, and the very people who cause the chaos, well, they then are the ones that offer the order. Isn't that what happened when it came to the French Revolution? And when it came to the French Revolution, and when it came to the different things that were going on in France, the idea was that they were basing their revolution after the American Revolution. Their violence, their mob violence, was said to be the same as what the Americans did. They wanted independence from tyranny. And the monarchy was, in fact, tyrannical. So why did the French Revolution not go so well and the American Revolution did? Well, there was a couple of differences. Once again, it goes back to the righteous reasons, the righteous violence, the righteous revolution. Righteous versus not righteous. Sometimes that seems it could be objective. It's a matter of how you look at it. To one person that is a terrorist, to another person it might be a freedom fighter. I get that. So which is the right answer? Well, the right answer was obvious when it came to the American Revolution and the French Revolution, because the differences were obvious. The American Revolution was about being a godly country seeking independence from tyrants, and doing so in an effort to seek and achieve a system based on individualism and a free market. In France, they removed the Christian element and the individualism element, and it was really about secularism and collectivism. And what they got was a disaster. What they got was, well, just mob violence. And a revolution that led to the slaughter of innocent people and the rise of a new tyranny after one was removed, and then a succession of Napoleons and dictators and so forth after that. In other words, to have a righteous revolution, one needs God and individualism. And a free market system doesn't hurt. To have one that is nothing more than mob rule and a mobocracy that falls apart and really leads to tyranny, well, you remove the individualism and the godliness. And you insert secularism and collectivism like the French did, and you wind up with the French Revolution. And the French Revolution wound up with the beheadings and the fires and the violence. Well, the American Revolution had violence too, right? But there was a united goal of independence under the divine providence, protection of divine providence. They were willing to put on the lines their lives, their fortunes, of sacred honor. It was a righteous revolution. It was, well, righteous violence in the streets. So when we have people out there, and I know they're out there because I've seen the cartoons and I've heard of the people talking about it, the lefties and so on and so forth, talking about, well, these conservatives, boy, I tell you what, they're all about flinging their guns around when it comes to their Second Amendment rights and thinking that they got to take down the government, but the moment the people rise up for a righteous, just reason of racism and stamping out racism, well, then suddenly they're against it. Those hypocrites. This isn't about racism. It's not about the systemic racism. I don't believe that that's going on. If it was, we wouldn't have had a Mr. Obama as president. Yeah, I know some people, could even say they cheated in that one too. That's a different video. Talk about it some other time. But I don't believe the systemic racism is going on like we're being told. It's an excuse. Black Lives Matter leaders have admitted that they are, well, Marxist, leftist, socialist. In other words, they believe in collectivism and secularism and a move away from what the American system's about. Sound familiar? And so they're willing to do whatever it takes to bring that about. They're willing to create violence and unrest and chaos, but not for a righteous reason, but to destroy the old system so that they can rebuild it in a socialistic, communistic manner. So it's not righteous mobocracy. It is mob rule. It's not the republic that America is. It's mob rule. It's the mob saying, you know what? We don't believe in your system. We don't believe in this Western system of justice where the innocent, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. They want, for example, Chauvin. He has to prove his innocence. I'll talk about that in a different video on a different channel. But in America, you don't have to prove your innocence. In America, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. I once saw a video by John Birch Society, and I'm not going to play the video. I'm not going to get into it per se, but I'm going to talk about it because it's really the difference between mob rule tyranny and a just system. And so what happens is this murderer, he's out there and he gets caught by the posse. The posse brings him in. There's 50 of them, and they vote 49-1 to hang him. They find the highest tree. They throw the rope over the tree. They put it around the guy's throat. They sit him on the horse, slap the horse's butt. Horse takes off. Guy hangs. Democracy has won. There's one less murderer in the democracy because the mob took care of it. But see, in our constitutional republic, which has a long history that's being toppled, The statues are coming down because we don't want to admit our history, what it's all about. Well, our history is what led to our system. Our system is the most fair in the world. That's beside the point. And in that scenario, the killers out there, the posse gets together, all 50 of them, they ride out, they grab the guy, they bring him back, they vote 49-1 to hang him, they throw the rope over the branch. Before they hang him, the sheriff shows up, and the sheriff says, you know what, boys? This man has his rights. He's innocent until proven guilty. He has a right to a fair trial and a jury of his peers. And then, even then, when he's before the jury, it's not a majority vote. It must be unanimous. In America, even when guilty, rights are an important thing for everybody. Americans, as Americans. Well, we just know he's guilty. He's got to hang. That's not justice. That's kangaroo court. That's tyranny. That's mob rule. And if we start doing that, we're going to descend into a very dark place. A mob is the tyranny of the many, unrestrained by law or decency. That's the quote on the screen. Let me back up. Sometimes the mob is not a tyranny of the many. See, democracy, and we'll have a slide later on that'll say this. Democracy is tyranny of the majority. Sometimes it's not the majority. It's the majority of the people involved or active or willing to be. Or maybe the squeaky wheel. Because sometimes the mob is so loud, the real majority is silent because they're afraid. They hide. They don't come out because they've been intimidated. They've been threatened by the mob. So sometimes the mob isn't the many. Sometimes it isn't the majority. Sometimes the mob is just, well, the vicious. Tyranny of the majority, a phenomenon of democracies where the majority oppresses the rights and voice of the minority. That's one of the reasons why our Constitution has mechanisms in it that make us a republic. But our republic is being dismantled. The states used to have a voice in the U.S. Senate, but the 17th Amendment changed that. They used to have a voice in the budget. The 16th Amendment changed that, both in 1913. It used to be the United States are a plurality of states that worked together as independent, autonomous, sovereign units that came together in a voluntary union. Now the United States is a national system where the states are really nothing more than provinces, and they're under the ruling fist of a federal government that was created not to be a ruling party, but to be servants, to handle the external issues. We're not supposed to be subjects. We're citizens. We're citizens of a country that was based in liberty. And the government's supposed to be our servants. We're not supposed to be theirs. But now what we have is we've got the mob. The mob has been fooled into believing that if they are loud enough, they will change the system, because change is good, whatever that change is, and they're not even sure what the change is. I think they kind of think they know. But they want change. We need change, because whatever's working isn't working. Well, why is it not working? Well, partly because mechanisms are missing from the Constitution, and partly because actually it is working, but it's not working for you, so therefore you want to do the violence. Why isn't it working for you? Well, gosh, Doug, I live in this city, and it's poor, and it's broken down, and there's homeless, and the systemic racism, it's horrible. Oh, you mean the cities that are run by Democrats? And have been for over 50 years? You mean that? Because that's not what's happening in the areas that are ruled by people who believe in the original Constitution. It's a very different world when it comes to those places. Well, yeah, but those right-wingers, they're the violent ones. The Second Amendment. You saw what happened on January 6th. Trump incited violence, and they got violent. They tried to take over the government. They tried to steal it. No, that's actually not true. For example, the breach of the barricades and the overrunning of the police officers on the steps of the Capitol that you saw on video actually happened before Trump even finished his speech. And the people were still about an hour walk away when it came to, moving through 1 million people. Would have been about half an hour if nobody was in their way. Are you sure that was Trump supporters that incited that? Instigated that? Are you sure? And even if it wasn't, how is that worse than Seattle, Portland, or people getting on TV now saying, well, if Chauvin goes free, we're going to riot. He better be guilty or else. We're going to really just make the cities burn. Well, how is that justice? How is that a fair trial? That's the mob saying, you know what? We're going to get our way or else. Mob rule. Well, Doug, you just said right before the American Revolution. I get that. But that was about independence. That was about gaining rights, not taking away rights. This is about removing a man's right. He's innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, I saw the video. I saw the knee on the neck. But there was, fentanyl in the bloodstream of the victim, so on and so forth. Is there reasonable doubt? Because that's how our system works. Well, he has to prove he's innocent. No, he doesn't. He's innocent until proven guilty. Is there reasonable doubt? And if there is, he could go free. And that's okay. That's the way the system works. And if they can prove his guilt, then he won't go free. Let the system do its job. If we start threatening the system and telling the system, you do it this way or else, you'll lose the system. You no longer have a system. Justice will no longer matter. We've seen this type of mob mentality before. It happened in the Soviet Union before the communist takeover. It happened in Germany before the Nazi takeover. It happened in China. It happened in Cambodia. It happened in Vietnam. It happened in Cuba. It happened in Venezuela. This is not righteous street violence. This is not righteous protesting. This is not righteous rallying. This is an attempt to overthrow a system based on liberty and to replace it with a system that has failed over and over and over in history. Oh, that's some conspiracy theory, Doug. Yeah, come on, the Democrats are a bunch of communists or not. You tell me, what change do they want? They say they want change. What's the change? First of all. Second of all, where's the federal government getting its authorities? I've read the Constitution. They don't have all these authorities. They're acting in manners they're not supposed to also. That gets back to being the democracy versus the republic. We're not supposed to be a democracy. And this mob, that's what they're demanding, a democracy. You know what a democracy is? A transitional form of government where the people can be fooled into bringing in the dictators. The dictators, the tyrants, the people who are seeking power create chaos. They've done it in history over and over and over. In Russia, the Russian Revolution. In Germany, Mussolini's Italy. China, Southeast Asia, you name it. Cuba, Venezuela, El Salvador, Nicaragua. It happens every time, and here's what happens. The very people that created the chaos then promises the order afterwards and take control. And you know what they do with the people who were in the streets being violent and trying to, stand for change? Their allies. Every time in history they kill them. Why? Because tyrants don't want rebels. They want sheep. So the very rebels that bring about the change, they're done away with. And those who quietly accepted the change, the new system, the socialism, the communism, the tyrannical rule, they get to remain. But they remain in shackles, in bondage. A democracy never lasts. It soon wastes. It destroys itself. There's never been a democracy that didn't commit suicide. James Madison said that democracies are short in their lives and violent in their deaths. We're supposed to be a republic. They've been making us a democracy so that they can do what they're doing. This is the narrative. This is the agenda. This is the plan. When I say they, you know who I mean. Those forces who stand against the U.S. Constitution. And the problem is they're using the mob for their tyranny. They're using the mob to bring about their tyranny. They're using the mob to follow a recipe that goes back ages. That's been tried and tried over and over again. And here's what happens. Change doesn't happen. Well, it does, but not change for the good. The change that people think they're getting isn't what they get. What happens is tyranny. And what happens in that tyranny is death. Every time. People die. And who dies? Those who dare to oppose the new tyranny. The people on the streets right now think they're opposing tyranny. That's what they believe, because that's what they've been taught. They've been indoctrinated. They believe this. I truly believe the people who are doing all this really think they're doing a good thing. In their minds, they really believe that we have systemic racism, a tyrannical system, that the American Constitution is based on, fill in the blank. And in reality, if you look back at our history, we've got the most prosperous, most liberty-laden history of any country. Was it a rough ride? Sure. We had our difficult spills. We fought a war to abolish slavery. We had slavery at one point in this country. There was a civil rights movement because there were those in this country who didn't want to follow the law, follow the Constitution, and ensure that all Americans were treated fairly and equitably under the law. Sure, that happens. And we've become a better country because of it. So while everybody tries to topple the statues and burn the cities and get rid of what was, because we don't want to remember that tyrannical system under that Constitution. Let me ask you this, as you get older, are you wiser than you once were when you were younger because of all the right decisions you made? Of course not. Our mistakes, our missteps, and the difficult parts of our journey is what makes us stronger and wiser and better. And that's what's made America better. But rather than erase all that and the demand change into something that you don't even understand, that has failed over and over and over in history, how about we stop for a moment and think about what the nature of tyranny really is, and that what's going on is tyranny, that what is trying to overthrow our system of liberty has tyranny at its base, at its foundation. That Black Lives Matter leaders weren't lying when they said they're trained Marxists. They weren't lying when they said they want to bring about a violent change. They want to bring about a communist system. They want to burn it all down if they don't get what they want. Burn it all down? Burn down a system that has actually done more to make the world a better place historically? John Adams once said, "Liberty once lost is lost forever." While I don't believe it's lost forever, I do believe it's lost for a very long time. It could be generations, it could be centuries before liberty is regained if we lose it here. That's why it's important that we learn the lessons of history and we do what we can to show the world we're not a lawless society. Let's follow John Adams' lead. and prove to the world we're not a lawless society. We're going to have fair trials, like for Chauvin. Because we believe innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around. Because we believe that justice comes after all the facts have been heard and all the stories have been presented, and a jury has an opportunity without intimidation, and the witnesses have an opportunity to speak without intimidation. And then the jury comes to their decision. That's how our system works. Is it absolutely beyond belief perfect? No. Sometimes innocent people go to jail. Sometimes people who should be in jail are walking the streets. It happens. It's because of human nature, though, not because of the system. Human nature here is the problem. We are a flawed species. And in the end, if we're not a moral and virtuous people, we will descend into the chaos that we're experiencing. We will fall victim to the tyranny that is trying to grab us by the throat. Benjamin Franklin said, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters." John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." But here's the one I think is the most appropriate. George Washington, during his farewell speech, listen to the wisdom before you decide to go out there and burn it all down. "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life? If the sense of moral or religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice." That was George Washington, and he called it. He saw this coming. Before we threaten to burn it all down, let's let the American system do what it was intended to do. Should there be a mistrial? I don't know. Should Chauvin be found not guilty, guilty of some of the stuff and not the other? We don't have all the information. The evidence will be provided. Final arguments just happened. It's up to the jury, not up to the mob, or at least it's not supposed to be. Unfortunately, the mob has been practicing intimidation of the jury, intimidation of witnesses, intimidation of the court itself. And even politicians have done the same, inciting this type of activity and attitude. Let's let the system do what it does. And as Americans who believe in justice and who believe in the system that's in place, not mob rule, let us then go from there and learn from it and move forward as a people together. Because the Constitution is not a right-wing document, it's not a left-wing document. It's an American document. And the principles that we have in there and the court system that has emerged because of it should be respected and should be followed. Because for 240 years, it has proven to be, even though it's got a handful of flaws every once in a while, the best system we've seen in history. Or as Winston Churchill once said, the American system is the worst system ever, except for all others. My name is Douglas V. Gibbs. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you. Subscribe. Donate. DouglasVGibbs.com. It costs to do these things. And always remember, united we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you next time.